Mother Bear stopped in front of the car and begs for help. What this human baby did put everyone in tears. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning sun filtered through the trees surrounding the small cabin that sat at the edge of Pine Ridge Forest. Inside, little Lily Morgan, barely 14 months old, played contentedly on a colorful rug in the living room. Her chubby fingers stacked wooden blocks while her mother, Emma, prepared breakfast in the kitchen just a few steps away. The windows were open, allowing the fresh spring breeze to fill their home with the scent of wildflowers and pine. Emma hummed softly as she mixed pancake batter, keeping one eye on Lily through the doorway. Her husband, Thomas, had left early that morning to fix a broken fence on the far side of their property. The family had moved to this remote cabin just 6 months ago, seeking peace away from city life. They loved the connection to nature, even though they sometimes spotted wildlife near their home. Emma stopped stirring when she heard a strange sound from outside. Not quite a growl, but a low, pained moan. She froze, her maternal instincts immediately on alert. Wiping her hands on her apron, she walked cautiously toward the front window and peered out. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. There, just 20 feet from their front porch, stood a thin brown bear. Its fur was patchy and dull, lacking the healthy shine of a well-fed animal. The bear's ribs showed through its coat, and its eyes held an unmistakable look of desperation. Instead of the aggressive stance Emma feared, the bear seemed to sway weakly, its head hanging low between hunched shoulders. "Oh my goodness," Emma whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The bear was clearly starving. As Emma watched, the creature took a few hesitant steps toward their porch, nose raised to catch the scent of the pancakes. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost human, the bear sat back on its haunches and looked directly at the cabin window as if pleading. Emma's phone was in the kitchen. She needed to call Thomas, or perhaps the forest ranger. She backed away slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. "Stay there, Lily," she called softly. "Mommy needs to make a phone call." But when Emma turned around, Lily was no longer on her play rug. The wooden blocks lay abandoned, scattered across the floor. A chill ran down Emma's spine as she scanned the room. "Lily?" she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "Lily, where are you, sweetie?" The answer came not from inside the house, but from the creak of the front door that Emma had forgotten to latch properly that morning. Her heart nearly stopped as she rushed to the entrance. The door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. Emma pushed it open, her worst fears confirmed by the sight before her. There, sitting on the edge of the porch, was little Lily. And just a few yards away, the hungry mother bear watched the child with intense, unblinking eyes. Time seemed to stand still. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her body frozen between the doorframe. She wanted to scream, to lunge forward and snatch her baby away, but fear paralyzed her. Any sudden movement might startle the bear, triggering an attack. The distance between Lily and the desperate animal was barely 10 feet now. Too close, far too close. "Lily," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "Lily, honey, come to Mommy." But Lily didn't turn around. The toddler remained fixated on the bear, tilting her head curiously as though trying to understand this strange visitor. In her tiny hand, Emma now noticed, was a half-eaten oatmeal cookie. Leftovers from yesterday's snack that Emma had allowed her to nibble on while playing this morning. The bear's nostrils flared, catching the sweet scent. Its eyes never left the cookie in Lily's hand. Emma could see the animal's chest heaving with each labored breath. Bears were supposed to be well fed this time of year, not skeleton thin and desperate. Something was very wrong. A sudden realization hit Emma like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just any bear. This was the mother bear they'd spotted several times with her cubs during winter. Local rangers had mentioned the family, telling them to keep a respectful distance. But where were her cubs now? Emma squinted, scanning the tree line for any sign of baby bears. There were none. The mother bear took another step forward, and Emma bit back a scream. But instead of charging, the creature made a soft, plaintive sound, almost like a whimper. That's when Emma noticed something else, a dark stain on the bear's hind leg. Blood. The animal was injured, limping slightly as it moved. "Thomas," Emma whispered, wishing desperately that her husband would appear from around the corner of their property. But he was too far away to hear, and her phone remained on the kitchen counter behind her. Lily, oblivious to the danger, did something that made Emma's heart nearly stop. The toddler extended her small arm, offering the cookie to the bear. "No!" Emma gasped, but to her astonishment the bear didn't lunge. Instead, it lowered its massive head, sniffing the air cautiously. Its movements were deliberate, almost gentle, despite its obvious hunger. The bear inched forward, eyes fixed on the morsel in Lily's hand. Emma knew she should move, should risk everything to save her child. But before she could take a step, a flash of movement from the forest caught her eye. There, emerging from the underbrush with unsteady steps, came two small bear cubs. They were even thinner than their mother, their fur dull and eyes sunken. Suddenly, everything made sense. The mother wasn't just hungry, she was desperate to feed her babies. As the cubs stumbled toward their mother, one of them collapsed, too weak to continue. The mother bear turned, making a soft grunting noise toward her fallen cub, but seemed too exhausted to go to it. Lily, as though understanding the unfolding tragedy, dropped her cookie and began to scoot forward on her bottom, moving toward the porch steps. "Lily, no!" Emma finally found her voice, lunging forward. But she was too late. Lily had already slid down the single step to the ground, her tiny feet now on the same earth as the wild, unpredictable creature before her. Emma's scream pierced the morning air as she rushed toward her daughter. The mother bear startled, rising slightly on her hind legs, a low growl rumbling from her throat. Emma froze again, just 3 feet from Lily, terrified that her actions had sealed their fate. But what happened next defied everything Emma knew about wild animals. Instead of attacking, the mother bear dropped back to all fours and backed away slightly, creating distance between herself and the humans. Her eyes darted between Emma and Lily, then back to her cubs, one still struggling to stand, the other lying motionless on the forest floor. Lily, unaware of her mother's terror, babbled happily and pointed toward the fallen cub. "Baba," she said, her limited vocabulary trying to make sense of the small creature that looked so much like her stuffed teddy bears inside. "Lily, please," Emma whispered, slowly extending her hand. "Come to Mommy." But Lily had other ideas. The toddler turned and crawled back toward the porch, away from the bear, but not toward Emma. For a heart-stopping moment, Emma thought her daughter was simply disobeying. But then she realized Lily was heading toward something specific. The wicker basket of apples that sat beside the porch swing. Thomas had picked these apples yesterday from their small orchard. They weren't the prettiest fruits. Some were misshapen, others had small bruises. But they were sweet and plentiful. Emma watched in disbelief as Lily reached the basket and, with considerable effort, pulled one large apple from the top. "Ba-ba," Lily repeated, turning and holding the apple out, not toward the mother bear, but in the direction of the fallen cub. Emma's mind raced. Her daughter couldn't possibly understand the complexity of what was happening. Could she? Yet there was Lily, clutching an apple nearly as big as her hand, eyes fixed not on the adult bear that could kill her with a single swipe, but on the suffering baby animal at the forest's edge. A sound behind Emma made her jump. "Emma! What's going—" Thomas's voice cut off abruptly as he rounded the corner of the cabin and took in the scene before him. He carried a hammer in one hand, his work gloves dirty from the morning's fence mending. "Don't move," Emma breathed, her eyes never leaving Lily. "There are cubs. One's hurt." Thomas went rigid, his knuckles white around the hammer's handle. Neither of them had ever encountered a bear this close, let alone a mother with cubs. Every wilderness safety lesson warned that this was the most dangerous situation possible. But the desperate mother bear didn't charge. Instead, she made a soft, keening sound toward her fallen cub. The other baby bear had managed to stumble to its sibling's side and was nuzzling it gently, trying to rouse it. "They're starving," Thomas whispered, his anger at the situation evident in his tight voice. Forest fire must have driven them from their usual feeding grounds. Rangers mentioned bears being displaced. While her parents remained frozen in fear, Lily took action. With determination remarkable for a child so young, she began to crawl toward the fallen cub. Apple clutched tightly in her small fist. "Thomas," Emma choked out, "do something." But before Thomas could move, the mother bear let out a warning huff, stopping Lily in her tracks. The toddler sat back, confused by the noise but not frightened. Then, showing wisdom beyond her years, Lily placed the apple on the ground and pushed it with all her might. The fruit rolled awkwardly across the uneven earth, coming to rest halfway between her and the bears. The mother bear's gaze followed the apple's path. For several tense seconds, no one moved. Then, with obvious caution, the bear approached the offering. She sniffed it thoroughly before gently taking it in her mouth. Instead of eating it herself, she carried it to her cubs, dropping it beside the fallen one. The standing cub immediately began to nibble at the fruit, but its sibling remained motionless. The mother bear nudged her fallen baby with her nose, making soft sounds that needed no translation. They were the sounds of a mother's desperation, of love and fear intertwined. Lily watched this interaction with intense focus. Then, to Emma's horror, she turned and crawled back to the apple basket. "Thomas," Emma pleaded, "get her." Thomas took a careful step forward, but stopped when the mother bear's head snapped up, watching him. They were caught in an impossible standoff. The humans unable to retrieve their child. The bear unwilling to leave her cubs. Lily reached the basket again and, with determination etched on her little face, pulled out another apple, and another, and another. Soon, her lap was full of fruits too heavy for her to carry all at once. "What is she doing?" Thomas whispered. As if in answer, Lily began to push the apples one by one across the ground, sending them rolling toward the bear family. Some stopped short, others rolled true. The mother bear watched this curious behavior, her eyes moving between the child and the growing collection of food before her. "She's feeding them," Emma realized, her fear giving way to awe. The mother bear seemed to understand that the small human posed no threat. With cautious movements, she gathered the apples that had rolled closest to her, again taking them to her cubs. The standing cub ate eagerly, its hunger evident in every bite. But the fallen cub still hadn't moved. The mother bear nuzzled it again, more urgently this time, pushing an apple directly against its mouth. The little one's eyes remained closed. A tear slid down Emma's cheek as she recognized what was happening. The cub wasn't just weak, it was dying, perhaps already gone. The mother bear's desperate quest for food had come too late for one of her babies. Lily, however, wasn't satisfied with just providing food. To the astonishment of her parents, she began to crawl directly toward the bears again, this time with purpose in her movements. "Lily!" Emma cried out, lunging forward despite the danger. But before she could reach her daughter, Thomas caught her arm. "Wait," he said, his voice tight with fear, but also something else, a strange certainty. "Look at the bear." The mother bear was watching Lily approach, but showed no signs of aggression. Instead, her posture communicated something impossible to misread: resignation, perhaps even trust. It was as though the animal understood that this small human meant no harm. Lily stopped beside the fallen cub. With gentle hands, the same hands that stacked blocks and reached for her mother, she stroked the baby bear's fur. "Baba," she said softly. "Up?" The mother bear could have killed Lily with a single swipe. Instead, she watched as this tiny human touched her dying cub with such tenderness. Emma and Thomas stood frozen, tears streaming down both their faces now, caught in a moment that defied explanation. Then something miraculous happened. Under Lily's gentle touch, the fallen cub's ear twitched. Then its paw moved slightly. It wasn't dead, just severely dehydrated and starving. "Thomas," Emma whispered. "The water canteen on the porch." Understanding immediately, Thomas backed away slowly, retrieved the canteen, and with movements telegraphed to appear non-threatening, he approached his daughter and the bears. Emma watched in disbelief as her husband knelt beside their toddler, the mother bear just feet away, and poured water into his cupped hand. Lily, mimicking her father's movements, placed her smaller hand under his, helping to create a little pool that they carefully brought to the cub's mouth. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the cub's tongue darted out, licking weakly at the liquid. Encouraged, Thomas poured more water, this time directly but gently into the cub's slightly opened mouth. The mother bear made a soft sound. Not a growl, but something Emma could only describe as encouragement. The standing cub, its hunger temporarily sated by the apples, wobbled closer to its sibling, curling up beside it as though lending strength. The pancake batter, Emma suddenly remembered. Without thinking about her own safety, she rushed back into the kitchen, mixed milk into the batter to create a more liquid, nutritious mixture, and returned to the porch. Thomas met her there, taking the bowl. Together, they returned to where Lily still sat, stroking the fallen cub. "Pancake for Baba," Lily said simply, pointing to the bowl. Thomas carefully spooned small amounts of the mixture, offering it to the weakened cub. At first, the liquid simply dribbled from its mouth, but after a few attempts, the cub began to swallow. Life visibly returned to its tiny body with each successful feeding. "It's working," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The fallen cub's eyes fluttered open, revealing dark orbs that blinked in confusion at the strange creatures helping it. The mother bear made a soft huffing noise, and the cub responded with a weak whimper of recognition. Emma had never witnessed anything so profoundly moving. Here was her family, her husband and her baby daughter, saving the life of a wild animal that, under any other circumstances, would be considered a deadly threat. Yet, in this moment, they were simply two families struggling to survive, the barriers of species erased by compassion and shared understanding. Lily giggled as the cub licked the remaining batter from Thomas's fingers. "Baba better," she announced proudly. A sound behind them made Emma turn. From around the side of the cabin came their neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins, his hunting rifle held ready in his weathered hands. The elderly man had lived in these mountains all his life, and often checked on the young family, concerned about their inexperience with wilderness living. "Don't move," Jenkins called out, raising his rifle and taking aim at the mother bear. "I'll drop her before she can charge." "No!" Emma cried, instinctively moving to place herself between Jenkins's rifle and the bear family. "They're not hurting anyone. The cubs are starving. We're helping them." Jenkins lowered his rifle slightly, squinting in disbelief at the scene before him. "Have you folks lost your minds? That's a wild bear not 10 feet from your baby." "Look," Thomas said quietly, still kneeling beside Lily and the recovering cub. "Just watch." The old man's mouth fell open as he took in the full reality of what was happening. The apples scattered on the ground, the bowl of batter, Lily's small hand gently patting the cub's head, and most astonishingly, the mother bear allowing it all. "I've lived in these mountains 67 years, Jenkins said, slowly lowering his rifle completely. "Never seen anything like this. Bears with cubs are the most dangerous animals in these woods." "Not this one," Emma said softly. She knew we could help. She was begging, not threatening. As they watched, the fallen cub struggled to stand. Its legs wobbled like Lily's had when she first learned to walk. The mother bear gently supported her baby with her large body, helping it maintain balance. The sight brought fresh tears to Emma's eyes. "The fire destroyed their feeding grounds," Jenkins said, his gruff voice softening. "Rangers found 2 bears dead last week from starvation. Others have been breaking into trash cans down in town. They're desperate." The strengthened cub took a few tentative steps, leaning against its sibling. The mother bear made a soft, encouraging sound, then turned her attention back to the humans who had saved her baby. She approached Thomas, who still knelt beside Lily, and lowered her massive head until her eyes were level with his. Thomas remained perfectly still, one arm protectively around Lily, though the child showed no fear. Emma held her breath, as did Jenkins behind her. The mother bear looked directly into Thomas's eyes for what seemed an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then, in a gesture that none of them would ever forget, she gently pressed her nose against Thomas's cheek before backing away. "Good Lord," Jenkins breathed. "She's thanking him." The mother bear returned to her cubs, gently herding them toward the remaining apples. The previously fallen cub was still weak but mobile, eagerly nibbling on the fruit alongside its sibling. Emma knelt beside her husband and daughter, wrapping them both in her arms. Tears flowed freely down her face. "You saved it, Lily," she whispered into her daughter's soft hair. "You knew exactly what to do." Jenkins approached cautiously, his rifle now held loosely at his side. "You folks just did something I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." The old man's voice cracked with emotion. "That little one," he nodded toward Lily. "She's got a gift, a pure heart that even wild creatures can recognize." As they watched, the mother bear gathered her strength and her cubs. With one last look at the humans who had shown such unexpected kindness, she led her babies toward the forest. The cubs followed unsteadily but alive, both of them alive, thanks to a child too young to understand fear but old enough to recognize suffering. "We should call the wildlife rangers," Thomas said, finally breaking the spell of the moment. "They need to know about these bears, help them find new feeding grounds." Jenkins nodded. "I'll radio them myself. Got a friend works with the service." The old man wiped a suspiciously damp eye with the back of his hand. "They'll want to check that injured leg too. Probably got caught in some debris from the fire." Emma couldn't take her eyes off the bears as they disappeared among the trees. "Will they survive?" she asked, her voice small. "They've got a fighting chance now," Jenkins replied. That cub wouldn't have made it through another day without your help." He shook his head in wonder. "Still, can't believe what I just saw. Folks in town ain't never gonna believe this story." Lily wiggled in her parents' embrace, pointing toward where the bears had vanished. "Ba come back?" she asked innocently. Emma hugged her daughter close. "Maybe, sweetheart, but they need to be with their own kind, in the forest where they belong." That evening, as darkness fell over Pine Ridge Forest, the Morgan family sat on their porch swing. Lily had finally fallen asleep after an exciting day, her small body curled trustingly against Emma's chest. Thomas had his arm around them both, his eyes scanning the tree line periodically. "I keep thinking about how easily that could have gone wrong," he admitted quietly. "We could have lost her, Emma." Emma nodded, stroking Lily's soft hair. "But we didn't. Instead, we witnessed something miraculous." She looked up at her husband. "How did she know, Thomas? How did our baby understand what even we couldn't see at first?" Thomas was silent for a moment. "Jenkins said something before he left that stuck with me. He said children and animals speak the same language, the language of needs without pride, of feelings without filters. Lily didn't see a dangerous predator. She saw a mother worried about her babies." The rangers had come that afternoon, taking careful notes and photographs of the apples still scattered on the ground, the bowl that had held the pancake batter. They'd asked endless questions, their faces showing the same disbelief that Jenkins had expressed. They promised to set up feeding stations deeper in the forest to help the displaced wildlife and to track the mother bear to treat her injury. One young ranger had knelt before Lily, who was safely in Emma's arms by then. "You did a brave thing, little one," he'd said gently. "Those bears will remember your kindness." As stars appeared overhead, Emma thought about the thin line between fear and compassion, between danger and connection. She thought about how her tiny daughter had crossed that line without hesitation, teaching them all a profound lesson about seeing beyond appearances to the heart of suffering. The forest around them was full of life, some of it potentially dangerous, all of it struggling to survive in its own way. Just like people, Emma realized, just like her family in this remote cabin, seeking their own place in the world. A soft rustling at the edge of the property made Thomas sit up straighter. Emma followed his gaze to where 3 shadows moved in the moonlight, a larger one and 2 smaller ones trailing behind. For just a moment, the mother bear's eyes caught the porch light, reflecting gold in the darkness. She paused, her cubs close beside her, both walking now, both alert and alive. The bear made no sound, no movement toward the cabin. She simply stood, watching the humans who had saved her baby, acknowledging their shared moment of connection before disappearing once more into the protective embrace of the forest. Tears slipped down Emma's cheeks as she held Lily closer. Some people lived their entire lives without witnessing true compassion in its purest form. She had seen it today in the actions of her 14-month-old daughter who, without words or understanding of danger, had recognized a mother's desperation and responded with pure love. Thomas noticed her tears and gently wiped them away. "Our daughter taught us something important today," he whispered. Emma nodded, feeling the steady heartbeat of her sleeping child against her own. "She showed us that sometimes the smallest hands can offer the greatest kindness." In the days that followed, news of the extraordinary encounter spread throughout the small mountain community. Rangers set up cameras near the Morgan property, hoping to document the bear's recovery. Neighbors brought food and gifts for the family, especially for Lily, now known affectionately as the Bear Whisperer. But none of the attention or gifts could match the profound gift Lily had already received and given. In a world often defined by boundaries and fears, she had moved with the simple wisdom of a child's heart, crossing the divide between species to offer help where it was needed most. And somewhere in Pine Ridge Forest, a mother bear and her two cubs continued their journey, their lives forever intertwined with the tiny human who had refused to see them as anything other than a family in need, just like her own. When Lily grew older, she would hear the story countless times of how she had crawled fearlessly toward a desperate mother bear, offering apples and gentle touches that saved a dying cub. She would see the photographs the rangers had taken, the newspaper clippings her parents had saved, but she would never need these reminders to understand the lesson at the heart of that extraordinary day. For Lily Morgan had always known, even as a baby, what many adults spend lifetimes trying to learn, that compassion is not bounded by language or species, by size or circumstance. It requires only an open heart and the courage to extend a hand, even a very small one, to those in need. 6 years passed. The small cabin on the edge of Pine Ridge Forest had grown, with Thomas adding a second story and a wider porch to accommodate their expanding family. Lily, now 7 years old, with flowing chestnut hair, and the same curious eyes that had once looked unafraid into the face of a desperate mother bear, had a 4-year-old brother named Noah. The story of Lily and the bears had become something of a local legend. Tourists occasionally drove up their long driveway, hoping to hear the tale firsthand or, more ambitiously, to catch a glimpse of the famous bears. Emma had eventually put up a polite but firm sign at the entrance to their property, requesting privacy. The Forest Service had been more helpful, creating educational materials about the incident and incorporating it into their programs about wildlife conservation and coexistence. The bears themselves had not been seen near the Morgan property since that extraordinary day, though forest rangers reported occasional sightings deeper in the woods. The mother bear's injured leg had healed well, according to their reports, and both cubs had grown into healthy adolescents before venturing off on their own, as young bears eventually do. Life had returned to a semblance of normality for the Morgan family, though they were forever changed by what they had witnessed. Emma had begun working part-time with the local wildlife rehabilitation center, helping injured and orphaned animals return to the wild. Thomas had constructed special bear-proof feeders that the Forestry Service used during particularly harsh winters or after natural disasters like the fire that had driven the mother bear to their doorstep years ago. And Lily, well, Lily had continued to show an uncanny connection with animals of all kinds. Injured birds would land near her when she played in the yard. The neighbor's skittish horse would calm immediately under her small hand. Even Mr. Jenkins' notoriously bad-tempered hunting dog would roll over for belly rubs whenever Lily visited. "It's like they know," Jenkins had remarked once, watching his dog's transformation from snarling guardian to delighted puppy under Lily's attention. "Like they remember what she did." On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when the bears had first appeared, Lily sat at the kitchen table finishing her breakfast. It was Saturday, and she had plans to explore the new treehouse her father had built at the edge of their property, far enough into the woods to feel adventurous, but close enough that Emma could still see it from the kitchen window. "Can I take some apples?" Lily asked, her eyes bright with anticipation for her day of exploration. Emma smiled, packing a small lunch into Lily's backpack. "Of course, don't go past the big oak tree, remember, and be back for lunch." "I will," Lily promised, taking the offered apples and carefully placing them in her backpack alongside her notebook, colored pencils, and a small field guide to local wildlife that Ranger Mike had given her for her birthday. Noah watched his sister with envy. "I want to go too," he protested, his lower lip jutting out in a familiar pout. "When you're 7. Thomas reminded him gently. That was our deal. As Lily headed out the door, Emma felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. It was hard letting her firstborn venture into the woods alone, even within the established boundaries. The memory of that day with the bears never quite left her. The terror of seeing her baby so close to wild animals, but also the wonder of witnessing such a pure connection. Lily skipped down the well-worn path that led to her treehouse, her mind already filled with the adventures awaiting her. Perhaps today she would finally spot the elusive red fox she'd glimpsed last weekend, or find more of those interesting mushrooms for her growing collection. The treehouse came into view, a simple but sturdy platform with short railings and a canvas roof, built around the trunk of a massive pine tree. Thomas had installed a rope ladder that Lily could pull up behind her, giving her the delicious feeling of being completely separated from the world below. As she approached, something caught her attention, a strange mark on the tree trunk. Lily moved closer, examining what appeared to be fresh claw marks gouged into the bark, much higher than she could reach. Bear marks. She'd seen enough of them on trees around their property to recognize them instantly. Heart quickening with excitement rather than fear, Lily glanced around the clearing. No signs of bears now, but these marks were fresh, maybe from last night or early this morning. She ran her small fingers over the grooves in the bark, feeling the sticky sap that still oozed from the wounds in the tree. Quickly, she climbed the rope ladder into her treehouse, pulling it up behind her as her father had taught her. Not out of fear, but from habit. The platform gave her an excellent view of the surrounding forest. She sat cross-legged, taking out her notebook and carefully sketching the claw marks she'd seen, noting the date and time as Ranger Mike had shown her. A soft rustling from the underbrush below made her pause. Lily leaned carefully over the railing, peering down at the forest floor. Nothing at first then, movement. A small shape emerged from between two ferns, followed by another. Bear cubs, but not babies. These were yearlings, about the size of large dogs, their fur a rich chocolate brown against the forest floor. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She remained perfectly still, remembering everything she'd been taught about wildlife observation. Movement caught her eye from another direction, and there she was, a large female bear, moving with the distinctive rolling gait of her kind. Even from her perch, Lily could see the slight irregularity in the bear's step, a barely perceptible limp in her back right leg. "It's you," Lily whispered, too softly for the bears to hear. "You came back." Could it truly be the same family? Lily tried to remember everything she had learned about bears from her books and Ranger Mike's lessons. The cubs from 6 years ago would be grown and gone by now, living their own lives in different parts of the forest. These must be new cubs, perhaps even grandchildren of the original mother bear. But that limp, subtle but unmistakable, and the way the mother bear moved with such purpose through the familiar territory. Lily felt certain this was the same bear who had once stood in their yard, desperately seeking help for her starving babies. The mother bear raised her head suddenly, her nostrils flaring as she caught a scent on the breeze. Lily held her breath as the bear's gaze swept upward, finally settling on the treehouse, on Lily herself. For a long moment, bear and child stared at each other across the distance of branch and sky. Then something extraordinary happened. The mother bear sat back on her haunches and lifted one paw slightly, almost like a gesture of greeting. The cubs, sensing something unusual, stopped their playful wrestling and watched their mother curiously. Lily's heart raced. She was too far for the bears to reach, safely ensconced in her treehouse. But the urge to establish some connection was overwhelming. Slowly, carefully, She raised her own small hand in response. The mother bear watched this gesture, her dark eyes unreadable. Then she made a soft huffing sound to her cubs, who immediately trotted to her side. With one last glance toward Lily, the bear led her family deeper into the forest, disappearing among the trees as silently as they had arrived. Lily scrambled for her notebook, recording every detail of the encounter with trembling fingers before the memory could fade. She drew the bears, noting the mother's limp and the cub's playful demeanor. At the bottom of the page, she wrote in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, "I think she remembered me." When she returned home for lunch, bursting with her news, Emma and Thomas exchanged worried glances. "Are you absolutely sure it was a mother with cubs?" Thomas asked, his concern evident. "Yes. 2 cubs about this big," Lily indicated with her hands, "and the mother had a limp in her back right leg, just like our bear did." Emma knelt to her daughter's level. "Lily, honey, bears are wild animals. Even if this is the same bear, which would be remarkable, she's still dangerous. You did exactly the right thing staying in your treehouse." "But she saw me, Mom. She looked right at me, and she wasn't angry or scary." Lily's eyes shone with excitement. "I think she remembered." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a habit when he was troubled. "I'll call Ranger Mike. If there's a mother with cubs in the area, they should know about it." That afternoon, Ranger Mike's familiar green truck pulled up to their cabin. The tall, bearded man had been one of the first responders to their bear encounter 6 years ago, and had since become a family friend, particularly fond of Lily and her natural affinity for wildlife. "So, I hear we might have some old friends visiting," he said, accepting the cup of coffee Emma offered as they sat on the porch. Little Noah was busy showing the ranger his collection of pine cones, while Lily sat attentively, her notebook open on her lap. "Lily thinks it might be the same bear from before," Emma explained, her voice betraying her concern. Ranger Mike nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible. Female bears often keep to the same territory for their entire lives if there's adequate food and shelter." He turned to Lily. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Lily described the encounter in detail, showing her sketches and emphasizing the mother bear's distinctive limp. Ranger Mike listened attentively, asking occasional questions about the bear's behavior and appearance. "The wildlife cameras we set up after your first encounter captured images of a female with a healed leg injury moving through this area about a month ago," he confirmed. "We've been tracking her on and off for years. She's had several litters since you folks helped save her cub." He smiled at Lily. "So, yes, it could very well be your bear." "See," Lily said triumphantly to her parents. "I told you she came back." "But why now, after all this time?" Thomas asked. "And why so close to our property again?" Ranger Mike's expression grew more serious. "That's what concerns me. Bears don't typically approach human dwellings unless they're desperate or have found food sources there before." He looked meaningfully at Emma and Thomas. "Given your history with this particular bear, I'm wondering if she's seeking help again." "Help?" Emma repeated. "You don't think—" "I don't know," Ranger Mike admitted. "But there have been reports of unusual wildlife behavior deeper in the forest. Some of our researchers found evidence of contamination in Crystal Creek. It runs through the heart of these bears' territory." "Contamination?" Thomas frowned. "From what?" "There's an old mining operation about 20 miles upstream. Been abandoned for decades, but the recent heavy rains might have caused some leakage into the watershed." The ranger sighed heavily. "We've been testing water samples, but these things take time. Meanwhile, we've noticed fewer animals coming to drink from certain stretches of the creek." "Could it be making the bears sick?" Lily asked, her voice small with worry. Ranger Mike hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share with the sensitive child. It's possible. Animals are often more sensitive to environmental changes than we are. They can sense when something isn't right. Like how our bear came here when her cubs were starving, Lily said thoughtfully. She knew we could help. Exactly. The ranger nodded. Bears are incredibly intelligent. They remember food sources and safe places for years, even decades. So, what do we do? Emma asked, instinctively pulling Noah onto her lap as though the conversation itself might endanger him. First, we set up some wildlife cameras around your property. With your permission, of course. I'd like to see exactly what these bears are doing and assess their condition. Ranger Mike turned to Lily. And I could use a reliable assistant to help monitor them. Someone who knows these woods and has a good eye for detail. Lily's eyes widened. Me? Really? Really? The ranger confirmed with a smile. You've got a gift, Lily. Not many people can say they've earned the trust of a wild bear. That evening, as Emma tucked Lily into bed, she found her daughter staring thoughtfully out her bedroom window toward the darkened forest. What are you thinking about, Sweet Pea? Emma asked, smoothing Lily's hair. I think she needs our help again, Mom, Lily said quietly. I could feel it when she looked at me. Something's wrong in her world, and she remembered that we helped before. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. Lily, what happened when you were a baby was extraordinary. A miracle, really. But you need to understand that wild animals are unpredictable, even ones that might seem to remember us. But what if she really does need help? What if her cubs are sick from drinking bad water? Emma sighed, recognizing the determined set of her daughter's jaw, the same expression she'd seen in photos of baby Lily offering apples to a starving bear family. That's why Ranger Mike is here. He knows how to help wildlife safely. But she came to us, Mom, not to Ranger Mike. Lily's eyes were earnest in the soft lamplight. I think she trusts us. Later, Emma recounted the conversation to Thomas as they sat on the porch, the sounds of the forest creating a gentle symphony around them. She's so much like you, Thomas said, taking his wife's hand. That same quiet determination, that same heart. That's what worries me, Emma admitted. She doesn't fully understand the danger. To her, these aren't just wild animals. They're the characters from her favorite story. Our story, Thomas corrected gently. Our family's legacy. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the night sounds. Somewhere in the darkness, a mother bear and her cubs were making their way through familiar territory, perhaps searching for clean water, perhaps seeking help from the only humans who had ever shown them kindness. Thomas, Emma said suddenly, sitting up straighter, do you remember when we first moved here, how Jenkins showed us that old well on the north edge of our property? The natural spring? Sure. He said it was the reason this homestead was built here in the first place. Thomas looked at her curiously. Why? It's upstream from Crystal Creek, isn't it? Fed by a different watershed? Thomas's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. You think we should create a water source for the bears? Here on our property? Emma nodded slowly. If their water's contaminated, they need a clean alternative. And it would keep them away from the creek until the rangers can address the pollution. It's risky, Thomas said, though Emma could see he was already considering the logistics. We'd be deliberately attracting bears closer to our home. They're already here, Emma pointed out. At least this way, we're controlling where and why. She squeezed his hand. And it would mean everything to Lily, to know that we're helping her bears. The next morning brought Ranger Mike back to their property, this time with several wildlife cameras and a young female assistant introduced as Dr. Chen, a wildlife biologist specializing in large predators. As they set up the equipment, Thomas pulled the ranger aside and explained their idea about creating a clean water source using their natural spring. "It's not conventional," Ranger Mike admitted. "Usually, we discourage any actions that might attract bears to residential properties." He glanced over at Lily, who was enthusiastically helping Dr. Chen position a camera on a tree trunk. "But given the unique history here and the potential contamination issue, it might actually help us monitor the bears' health while keeping them away from the polluted creek." Dr. Chen joined their conversation, her expertise adding weight to the discussion. "If we set up the water source with cameras, we could gather valuable data on how the bears are doing, and if they are suffering from contamination, providing clean water might mitigate some of the effects while we address the source of the pollution." By midday, a plan had taken shape. Thomas would create a small pool fed by their natural spring, positioned at a safe distance from the house but visible from both their porch and Lily's treehouse. The rangers would install additional cameras specifically focused on this new water source, allowing them to observe the bears without direct human contact. As the adults finalized the details, Lily sat cross-legged on the porch steps, sketching in her notebook. Noah played nearby, building a tower of sticks under the watchful eye of his mother. The peaceful domestic scene was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel as a black SUV with government markings pulled up beside Ranger Mike's truck. A tall man in a crisp suit emerged, his expression severe as he approached. Emma immediately tensed, instinctively moving closer to her children. "Ranger Peterson," the man said with a curt nod toward Mike. He held up an identification badge. "Harold Blackwood, Environmental Protection Agency. I understand you've been investigating possible contamination in Crystal Creek." Ranger Mike straightened, clearly surprised by the official visit. "That's right. We've been collecting water samples and monitoring wildlife behavior." "Well, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to discontinue that investigation immediately," Blackwood stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The EPA is taking over all environmental assessments in this region." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific credentials evident in her confident posture. "May I ask why?" "We've already begun comprehensive testing and observation protocols." Blackwood's expression remained impassive. "The situation is more complex than initially understood. There are multiple stakeholders involved. The official position is that any preliminary findings are to remain confidential pending further investigation." Thomas and Emma exchanged concerned glances. The bureaucratic language wasn't lost on them. Someone powerful didn't want the contamination publicized. "Multiple stakeholders," Thomas repeated, a note of challenge in his voice. "You mean the mining company? The same one that's supposed to have cleaned up their operation decades ago?" Blackwood's gaze hardened. "Mr. Morgan, I understand your family has a property interest in this area, but environmental regulation is a complicated field requiring expert management." "This isn't just about property," Emma interjected, her voice steady despite her rising anger. "This is about wildlife being poisoned, including a bear family that has a special connection to our daughter." Blackwood's expression flickered with brief confusion before he regained his professional demeanor. "I'm sure your local wildlife stories are very charming, Mrs. Morgan, but the EPA will handle this matter according to federal protocols." Lily, who had been listening intently, stood up from her perch on the steps. "The bears came back," she said clearly, her young voice cutting through the tension. "They're asking for help again." Blackwood looked down at the child, momentarily taken aback by her direct statement. "Young lady, Bears don't ask for anything. They're animals acting on instinct. You're wrong, Lily replied with the simple certainty of childhood. They remember, and they know who helped them before. Before Blackwood could respond, Ranger Mike smoothly intervened. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you'd like to see our preliminary data. Dr. Chen has compiled some compelling evidence of unusual wildlife behavior patterns that might inform your agency's approach. As the adults moved toward Ranger Mike's truck to examine maps and water sample results, Emma knelt beside Lily. Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about how to help. Mr. Blackwood is just doing his job. Lily's expression remained troubled. But he doesn't understand about the bears, Mom. And they need clean water now, not after lots of meetings and papers. Later that evening, after the officials had departed with promises to keep the local rangers informed of their findings, which Thomas translated as, "We'll tell you what we want you to know," the family gathered around the dinner table. The mood was subdued, with even young Noah picking up on the adults' concern. "I don't trust that man," Thomas said quietly after the children had gone to bed. The way he wanted to shut down even basic monitoring of the situation. Something isn't right. Emma nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on their worn wooden table. Dr. Chen mentioned that the mining company has applied for permits to reopen some of the old shafts. A contamination scandal would certainly complicate that process. Thomas's jaw tightened. So they send in the EPA to control the narrative. Meanwhile, animals keep drinking poisoned water. "What do we do?" Emma asked. "We can't fight the federal government." Thomas was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe we don't have to fight them. Maybe we just need to help the bears ourselves, quietly, while the officials sort out their stakeholder issues." The next morning, Thomas began work on the water pool. He chose a location about 200 yards from their home, at the edge of a small clearing where the natural spring bubbled up from underground. With careful stonework, he created a shallow basin where the pure water could collect before flowing downhill toward the creek system. The location offered visibility from both their cabin and Lily's treehouse, but maintained a safe distance from everyday family activities. Dr. Chen, working unofficially after her conversation with Blackwood, helped position wildlife cameras around the new water source. "I'm still collecting data," she explained with a small smile. "I'm just not submitting it through official channels yet." Lily watched the construction with intense interest, offering suggestions about the pool's shape and depth based on her observations of the bears. "They need to be able to stand in it," she explained seriously. "Bears like to cool their feet when they drink." By mid-afternoon, the pool was complete. A natural-looking stone basin filled with clear spring water, accessible to wildlife, but deliberately placed to be visible from the safety of the Morgan home. Thomas added a few final touches, placing larger, flatter stones around the edges where animals could stand comfortably. "Now we wait," Ranger Mike said, checking the cameras one final time before departing. "Though I'd recommend keeping the children away from this area, just to be safe." That evening, as twilight fell, the Morgan family gathered on their porch. Even Noah seemed to understand the significance of the moment, sitting quietly on his father's lap instead of running around as usual. All eyes were focused on the distant clearing where the new water pool gleamed in the fading light. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" Lily whispered, her excitement barely contained. "Animals are creatures of habit," Thomas explained gently. "It might take time for them to discover the new water source." But Lily shook her head with certainty. "She already knows it's here. She's been watching us." Emma might have dismissed such a statement as a child's imagination just a few years ago. But after witnessing the extraordinary connection between her daughter and the bears, She found herself believing Lily's intuition. There was something special about her child's understanding of these wild creatures, something that transcended normal human-animal relationships. As darkness settled over the forest, they reluctantly went inside. Thomas set up a tablet connected to the wildlife cameras so they could monitor the pool remotely. Lily begged to stay up watching, but eventually her heavy eyelids won out, and Emma carried her sleeping form to bed. Just past midnight, Thomas, who had been periodically checking the camera feed, suddenly called out softly to Emma, "They're here." Emma rushed to his side, staring at the tablet screen in wonder. There, illuminated by the camera's infrared feature, stood the mother bear at the edge of the water pool. She sniffed cautiously, circling the stonework before lowering her head to drink. Her cubs followed suit, lapping eagerly at the clean water. "Should we wake Lily?" Emma whispered. Thomas shook his head. "Let's let her sleep. The cameras are recording everything. She can watch it in the morning." They sat together, mesmerized by the bear's behavior. The mother seemed to be purposefully washing her cubs, guiding them into the shallow water and using her paws to splash their fur. One cub playfully batted at the water while the other seemed more hesitant, staying close to its mother's side. "She's cleaning them," Emma realized, trying to wash something off their fur. "The contamination," Thomas said grimly. "It must be affecting them directly, not just when they drink it." The bears stayed at the pool for nearly an hour, drinking and washing repeatedly. Before they left, the mother bear did something that sent chills down both parents' spines. She stood up on her hind legs and turned directly toward the cabin, as though she knew exactly where the humans were watching from, and raised one paw in what almost seemed like a gesture of acknowledgement. "My God," Thomas breathed. "Lily was right. She knows." When Lily awoke the next morning, her excitement upon seeing the recorded footage was boundless. "I told you," she exclaimed, watching the video for the third time. She knew we made it for her. But the family's triumph was short-lived. Later that morning, as Thomas was checking on the water pool, a large government truck pulled up to their property. Two men in official uniforms approached him, carrying clipboards and wearing expressions that brooked no argument. "Mr. Morgan," one asked, consulting his paperwork, "I'm afraid we've received reports of unauthorized modification to the natural watershed on this property. We're here to issue a cease and desist order." "Modification? It's a small pool using our own spring water," Thomas protested. "Which feeds into Crystal Creek, sir, making it subject to federal regulation," the official replied smoothly. "Especially given the ongoing environmental assessment in this area, this is ridiculous," Thomas said, his frustration evident. "We're trying to provide clean water to wildlife that's being poisoned while your bosses play politics with the mining company." The official's expression hardened. "Sir, I strongly advise against making unfounded accusations about federal environmental procedures. The order requires you to return this area to its natural state within 48 hours, or face potential fines." As the officials departed, leaving Thomas holding the legal document, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the signature line at the bottom of the order was the name Harold Blackwood, Regional Director. When Thomas returned to the cabin and explained what had happened, Emma's face flushed with anger. "This is about silencing us, not protecting the environment. They're worried we'll document the effects of the contamination before they can control the narrative." Dr. Chen, who had arrived to check the camera footage, nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, this fits the pattern we've been seeing. The mining company has powerful allies. They're pushing to reopen the operation by the end of the year, and they can't afford a pollution scandal." "But what about the bears?" Lily asked, her voice small. "They need clean water." Thomas knelt before his daughter. "We're not giving up, sweetheart. We're just going to have to be smarter about how we help them." That afternoon, while Thomas consulted with a lawyer friend about fighting the cease and desist order, Emma and Lily sat together on the porch swing, watching the forest in thoughtful silence. "Mom," Lily said suddenly, "remember how you told me that when I was a baby, the mother bear came right up to our porch because she was desperate?" Emma nodded. She needed help for her starving cubs. "What if—" Lily hesitated, her young face scrunched in concentration. "What if we can't bring the clean water to the bears, but we could bring the bears to clean water?" "What do you mean?" "Old Mr. Jenkins has a big pond on his property, right? And it's fed by the same underground springs as ours. Could the bears drink there?" Emma considered this. Jenkins' property bordered theirs to the north, and his large fishing pond was indeed supplied by the same pure aquifer that fed their spring. It was also considerably further from Crystal Creek, making it less likely to fall under the same regulatory scrutiny. "That's actually quite clever," Emma admitted. "But how would we get the bears to go there? We can't exactly leave them directions." Lily's expression grew serious. "I think the mother bear would understand. If we could show her somehow—" Before Emma could respond to this improbable suggestion, they heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. Not the official government trucks they'd come to dread, but Ranger Mike's familiar green pickup. He wasn't alone. Sitting beside him was old Mr. Jenkins himself, his weathered face set in determined lines. "We won't let them down," he whispered to the night. "Any of them." The following days unfolded in a blur of tense waiting and cautious planning. Dr. Chen called each morning with updates on the cub's condition. Initially grave, then gradually improving as the chelation therapy began to draw the toxic metals from its small body. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had named the cub Hope, a sentiment that resonated deeply with the Morgan family. Meanwhile, Emma had reached out to her college friend Sarah at the National Wildlife Federation, carefully laying out the situation without revealing too many specifics that might violate the restraining order. Sarah had been immediately alarmed and promised to connect Emma with both legal resources and media contacts when they were ready to go public with their evidence. "The key," Sarah had explained, "is having documentation so compelling that it can't be dismissed or buried. We need to create enough public pressure that the EPA has to act, regardless of what the mining company wants." Jenkins continued to monitor his pond for signs of the mother bear and her remaining cubs. They had returned several times to drink and bathe, their visits captured on the wildlife cameras he'd installed. The improvement in the cubs' condition was subtle but noticeable, their movements more energetic, their fur looking healthier after regular immersion in clean water. Ranger Mike, still officially suspended but increasingly defiant about it, had taken to conducting private nature walks in the forest surrounding Crystal Creek, meticulously documenting every sign of wildlife distress and environmental degradation he found. Though careful to avoid direct violation of the restraining order that applied to the Morgans, he made no secret of his activities among fellow rangers, many of whom began quietly providing him with information and assistance. Thomas spent hours in consultation with environmental lawyers, searching for legal strategies to challenge both the restraining order and the mining company's operations. The costs were mounting: legal fees, wildlife cameras, water testing equipment, straining the family's modest savings. But neither Thomas nor Emma hesitated. Some things, they agreed, were worth any price. Lily had thrown herself into research, reading every book on bears she could find and filling her notebook with observations about the mother bear's behavior. She had developed a theory. which she explained to her parents with the serious conviction only a 7-year-old could muster. The mother bear had specifically sought them out because she remembered their help from years ago and had somehow passed that memory to her cubs. Bears teach their babies everything, she insisted. Where to find food, how to fish, which berries are safe. Why wouldn't she also teach them which humans can be trusted? Noah, too young to fully understand the situation but sensing its importance, had taken to drawing pictures of bears, countless crayon renditions of Lily's bears that now adorned the refrigerator and walls of his bedroom. It was on the 5th day after the rescue of the sick cub that the situation changed dramatically. Thomas was in the backyard splitting firewood. Lily was at her treehouse making observations of the forest, and Emma was inside with Noah when the sound of approaching vehicles once again broke the peaceful afternoon. This time, it wasn't government SUVs or Ranger Mike's familiar truck. It was a news van from the regional television station, followed by 2 more cars, one bearing the logo of the Pine Ridge Gazette, the local newspaper, and another unmarked sedan that Thomas didn't recognize. Emma rushed outside, Noah on her hip, her expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Thomas," she called, "did you contact the media?" Thomas shook his head, equally baffled, as he set down his axe and moved toward the approaching vehicles. Lily, spotting the commotion from her treehouse, quickly climbed down and ran to join her parents. The news van came to a stop, and a polished-looking reporter emerged, her cameraman already hoisting equipment onto his shoulder. The local newspaper's photographer and journalist followed, along with 2 people from the unmarked car who hung back slightly, observing. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," the television reporter called out, approaching with the confident stride of someone used to inserting herself into other people's stories. "I'm Vanessa Reynolds from Channel 8 News. We've received some very interesting footage regarding wildlife and crisis near your property. I was hoping you might comment." Thomas and Emma exchanged bewildered glances. "Footage?" Thomas repeated cautiously, mindful of the restraining order. "Yes," Reynolds confirmed, gesturing for her cameraman to join her. "Anonymous source, very compelling material. Shows bears clearly in distress near Crystal Creek, and what appears to be a dramatic rescue operation." She studied their faces intently. "You don't seem to know what I'm talking about." "We can't comment on anything related to Crystal Creek," Emma said carefully. "There's a legal situation." "The restraining order?" Reynolds nodded knowingly. "Yes, we're aware. That's part of our story, actually. How local residents trying to protect wildlife are being legally silenced while corporate interests potentially poison the environment." She smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. "It's quite a compelling narrative." Before Thomas could respond, one of the people from the unmarked car stepped forward. A woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Morgan, I'm Sarah Winters from the National Wildlife Federation. I believe you know my colleague, Emma's college roommate?" Emma's eyes widened in recognition. "You're here because of my call to Sarah Chen?" "Partially," Winters acknowledged, "but also because of this." She held up a tablet, showing them a still image from what was clearly the night they had rescued the sick bear cub. The night vision footage was grainy but unmistakable. Thomas and Lily standing near the mother bear, with Ranger Mike kneeling beside the ailing cub. "How did you get that?" Thomas asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Anonymous source," Winters replied, echoing the reporter's earlier words. "Though, if I had to guess, I'd say someone with access to wildlife cameras in the area felt strongly enough about what's happening to risk their job by sharing this footage." Thomas immediately thought of Doctor, Chen, or perhaps one of Mike's sympathetic ranger colleagues. Someone had decided to break ranks and bring their private battle into the public eye. "We can't discuss this," Emma insisted, glancing nervously down the driveway as though expecting Blackwood's government SUVs to appear at any moment. "The restraining order specifically prohibits us from collecting water samples or setting up wildlife monitoring," Winters interrupted smoothly. "It doesn't prohibit you from speaking to the media about your previous experiences with these bears, particularly the remarkable encounter 6 years ago that apparently created a lasting bond between your daughter and this bear family." The reporter's interest visibly intensified. A lasting bond? Between a child and wild bears? She turned to her cameraman. "Are you getting this?" Lily, who had been listening quietly, suddenly stepped forward. "They came back because they remembered us," she said confidently, "and because they needed help again." Reynolds knelt to Lily's level, her professional instincts recognizing a compelling interview subject. "What do you mean, sweetie? How did they need help?" "The creek water is making them sick," Lily explained simply. "The mother bear brought her cubs to us because she remembered we helped her before, when I was a baby." The reporter looked up at Thomas and Emma, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine curiosity. "Is that true? Did you actually help these same bears years ago?" Thomas hesitated, weighing their legal jeopardy against the opportunity to finally bring public attention to what was happening. Emma squeezed his arm, a silent signal of support for whatever he decided. "Yes," he said finally. "When Lily was just a baby, a desperate mother bear approached our home with starving cubs. My daughter," his voice caught slightly, "my 14-month-old daughter somehow knew they needed help. She offered them food, and we nursed a weakened cub back to health. And now they've returned," Reynolds prompted. "They've returned," Thomas confirmed, choosing his words carefully. "And they appear to be suffering from some kind of illness or poisoning. We believe it's connected to contamination in Crystal Creek." The second person from the unmarked car stepped forward now, a serious-looking man in wire-rimmed glasses carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Daniel Abernathy, environmental attorney with the Wildlife Legal Defense Fund. Before you say anything further, I should inform you that we're prepared to represent your family pro bono in any legal action stemming from the restraining order." Emma's eyes widened. "You are? But why?" "Because what's happening here fits a pattern we've been tracking across several states," Abernathy explained. "Corporate interests using regulatory capture to silence environmental whistleblowers. The footage we've received suggests this is a particularly egregious case, with clear evidence of wildlife poisoning being actively suppressed." The reporter, sensing an even bigger story than she'd initially thought, motioned for her cameraman to begin recording. "Mr. Morgan, would you be willing to tell our viewers about your family's extraordinary connection with these bears, and why you believe they're now in danger?" Thomas looked at Emma, at Lily, and finally at the forest beyond their property. The forest that had become not just their home, but their responsibility. He made his decision. "Yes," he said firmly, "it's time people knew the truth." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. The Morgan family shared their remarkable story, from the initial bear encounter when Lily was a baby to the recent return of the mother bear with her sick cubs. They were careful to avoid directly admitting to any actions that might violate the restraining order, with Abernathy occasionally raising a cautionary hand when questions veered into dangerous territory. But they spoke freely about the bears themselves, about Lily's inexplicable connection with them, and about their concerns regarding contamination in Crystal Creek. The television camera captured it all. Lily's earnest descriptions of the bears, Emma's passionate defense of the local ecosystem, Thomas's quiet determination to protect both the wildlife and his family. The newspaper journalist took detailed notes while the photographer captured images of the Morgan family on their porch, of Lily's treehouse with its view of the forest, of the edge of their property where the bears had first appeared years ago. Sarah Winters from the National Wildlife Federation provided context about similar cases across the country, explaining how normal regulatory protections often failed when powerful economic interests were involved. What makes this case unique, she emphasized, is not just the compelling evidence of contamination, but the extraordinary relationship between this child and these bears. It puts a face, a human face, on environmental damage that's usually invisible to the public. As the interviews wound down, Thomas pulled Abernathy aside. "What happens when Blackwood sees this broadcast? Won't he come after us for violating the restraining order?" The attorney's expression was grimly satisfied. "He might try, but there's a reason we coordinated with the media for this. Once your story is public, any attempt to punish you for speaking out will look like exactly what it is: corporate-backed intimidation. The restraining order itself will become part of the scandal." "And what about the bears?" Emma asked, joining them, "particularly the cub at the rehabilitation center." "The center has already agreed to go on record about the cub's condition," Winters explained. "They've documented clear evidence of heavy metal poisoning consistent with mine drainage contamination. Between that and the water samples Dr. Chen has been secretly collecting, we have a solid scientific case." Thomas shook his head, still concerned. "But the mining company has powerful allies, even with public pressure, which is why we need a smoking gun," Abernathy interrupted. "Something that proves the mining company knew about the contamination and actively covered it up." Before they could discuss further, the sound of tires on gravel announced new arrivals. Thomas tensed, expecting Blackwood and his government entourage, but instead it was Jenkins' ancient pickup, followed by Ranger Mike's personal vehicle. The old man approached the gathering with surprising speed, his face flushed with excitement. "Thomas, you'll never believe what Mike found in my attic." Ranger Mike joined them, carrying what appeared to be a dusty old ledger book and several faded manila folders. "Jenkins mentioned his father used to work for the mining company back in the 60s, he explained. "Said there might be some old company documents stored in his attic." Jenkins nodded eagerly. "Papa kept everything. Always said you never know when paperwork might come in handy." "And did it?" Thomas asked, hope rising in his chest. Mike's grin was answer enough. Quarterly environmental monitoring reports from 1964 to 1972, including internal memos acknowledging elevated levels of arsenic, lead, and mercury in groundwater samples near Crystal Creek. And, he paused for emphasis, explicit instructions to keep the findings from regulatory agencies. Abernathy nearly lunged for the documents, his professional composure momentarily abandoned. "This is exactly what we need. Proof of historical knowledge of contamination that they covered up." He looked at Jenkins in amazement. "Do you understand what you've done? These records could be the key to the entire case." The old man shrugged modestly. "Just doing what's right. My daddy would have wanted it this way. He quit that company when he realized what they were doing to the land." As the attorneys and environmental advocates pored over the newly discovered documents, the media team prepared to depart with their explosive story. Reynolds, the television reporter, approached Lily one last time. "You're a very special young lady," she said warmly. "Not many people would be brave enough to help wild bears or smart enough to understand what they needed." Lily considered this seriously. "I'm not sure I'm special," she said finally. I think maybe people just forget how to listen to animals when they grow up. I'm still remembering." The reporter's practiced smile softened into something more genuine. That's a beautiful way to think about it. She glanced at her notebook. "One last question. What would you say to other kids who might want to help wildlife like you did?" Lily thought for a moment. "You don't have to talk to bears to help them," she said finally. "You just have to care about what happens to them and speak up when they're in trouble. Animals can't tell people when something's wrong, so we have to notice for them." Reynolds nodded, visibly moved. "Out of the mouths of babes," she murmured, before thanking the family and heading to her news van. As the cavalcade of vehicles departed down their long driveway, Thomas put his arm around Emma's shoulders. "Well," he said, with a mixture of relief and apprehension, "I guess we've officially gone public." Emma leaned into his embrace. "Do you think it will make a difference?" "I think," Thomas replied slowly, "that it's a lot harder to silence people when everyone is watching." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Lily suddenly put down her fork and looked toward the window. "They're here," she said quietly. Thomas followed her gaze, but saw only the darkening forest. "Who's here, sweetheart?" "The bears," Lily replied with certainty. "The mother and the other cubs. They're at the edge of the trees." Emma and Thomas exchanged glances, years of experience having taught them to trust their daughter's mysterious connection with the forest creatures. Together, the family moved to the large picture window that overlooked their yard and the forest beyond. At first, they saw nothing in the gathering dusk. Then, movement. A large shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows beneath the trees. The mother bear emerged into the last light of day, her two remaining cubs close beside her. She paused at the very edge of the forest, clearly visible but maintaining a safe distance from the house. "She knows something's happening," Lily whispered. "She can feel it." As they watched, the mother bear rose briefly onto her hind legs, scanning the area as though searching for something, or someone. Her gaze seemed to settle on the window where the family stood, on Lily's small face pressed against the glass. "What is she doing?" Noah asked, his young voice hushed with wonder. "Saying thank you," Lily answered simply. "And goodbye, for now." The bear dropped back to all fours and made a soft huffing sound to her cubs. Together, the three bears turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. "Goodbye," Emma repeated, looking at her daughter with concern. "What do you mean, goodbye?" Lily's expression was peaceful, showing none of the distress Emma might have expected. "They're going deeper into the forest, away from the creek, somewhere safe until the water is clean again." She turned to her mother with quiet confidence. "But they'll come back someday, when it's time." Thomas marveled again at his daughter's conviction, her absolute certainty about what the bears were thinking and feeling. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as a child's imagination, but too much had happened to ignore the special bond that seemed to exist between Lily and these wild creatures. Late that night, after the children were asleep, Thomas and Emma sat on their porch swing, watching the stars appear above the darkened forest. The day's events had left them emotionally drained, but hopeful in a way they hadn't been since the crisis began. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Emma asked softly. "Going public, bringing all this attention to our family?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "I think we did the only thing we could do. Sometimes staying silent is a form of complicity." "Lily will be in the spotlight now," Emma worried. "The girl who talks to bears. I don't want her treated like some kind of sideshow attraction." "We'll protect her," Thomas assured her. And besides, you know our daughter. She's only interested in one thing, helping those bears." Emma smiled slightly. "She's remarkable, isn't she? Sometimes I wonder how we produced a child with such intuition." "I think it was always there," Thomas mused. "We just created the space for it to flourish. Not every child who feels connected to animals has parents who take that connection seriously." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest, their forest, the one they had committed to protecting no matter the cost. "Thomas," Emma said suddenly, "do you remember what Lily said? About people forgetting how to listen to animals when they grow up?" He nodded. "It struck me too. Made me wonder what else we've forgotten." "Maybe that's what this has all been about," Emma suggested. "Not just saving some bears or stopping a mining company. Maybe it's about remembering something essential that most of us have lost." Thomas squeezed her hand. "If so, we have one remarkable teacher in there," he said, nodding toward the house where their children slept. The next morning brought the first ripples of what would soon become a wave of public response. The local newspaper had already published a special edition with the headline, "Local Girls Bond with Bears Uncovers Environmental Scandal." Beneath it was a photograph of Lily standing at the edge of their property, looking toward the forest with an expression of solemn responsibility beyond her years. Channel 8 had run the story as their lead the previous evening, and clips were already spreading across social media and national news platforms. Emma's phone rang constantly with calls from reporters seeking additional interviews or comments. Abernathy advised them to direct all media inquiries to the Wildlife Legal Defense Fund's press office, which was coordinating their public response. By mid-morning, the first protesters had arrived in town. A small but vocal group of environmental activists holding signs condemning the mining company and supporting the Bear Girl, as Lily was being called in some of the more sensationalist coverage. Thomas watched these developments with mixed feelings. On one hand, the public attention was exactly what they needed to fight the powerful interests aligned against them. On the other, he worried about the circus-like atmosphere developing around his daughter's special connection with the bears. "We need to keep Lily grounded through all this," he told Emma, as they watched the local news coverage of the protests. "Make sure she understands that this isn't about her becoming famous. It's about protecting the forest and the bears." "I think she understands that better than we do," Emma replied wryly. Indeed, when Lily saw herself referred to as the Bear Whisperer on one news segment, she had simply shrugged and said, "That's silly. Bears don't need whispering. They need clean water and people to leave their homes alone." Around noon, Dr. Chen called with an update that brought tears to Emma's eyes. The sick cub, Hope, had turned a corner. The chelation therapy was working. The toxic metals were clearing from its system, and the veterinarians were cautiously optimistic about a full recovery. "Can we tell the mother bear?" Lily asked when Emma shared the news. "She must be worried about her baby." "I think," Thomas said gently, "that mother bears, like human mothers, have a way of knowing when their babies are doing better, even from far away. It's a kind of heart knowledge." Lily seemed satisfied with this explanation. "Heart knowledge," she repeated thoughtfully. "Like how I knew the bears were at the edge of the forest last night before we saw them." "Exactly like that," Thomas agreed, exchanging a meaningful glance with Emma over their daughter's head. The afternoon brought another unexpected development. A sleek black car pulled up to their cabin, and from it emerged Harold Blackwood himself. Not flanked by uniformed officers or legal representatives, but alone and looking distinctly uncomfortable. Thomas met him on the porch, his posture defensive. "Mr. Blackwood, come to serve more papers?" The EPA official shifted awkwardly. "Actually, Mr. Morgan, I've come to inform you that the restraining order has been temporarily suspended pending review." He cleared his throat. "And to let you know that the EPA is launching a comprehensive environmental assessment of Crystal Creek and the surrounding watershed, with particular attention to potential contamination from the old mining operation." Thomas raised an eyebrow, making no attempt to hide his skepticism. That's quite a change of heart. What happened to all those stakeholders who needed protection? Blackwood's expression soured. "Let's just say that the political calculus has shifted. When a 7-year-old girl and her bear friends make the national news, certain priorities get reconsidered. So, this is about public relations, not environmental protection," Thomas observed flatly. "Does it matter?" Blackwood countered. "You're getting what you wanted, a full investigation, cleanup resources, regulatory oversight." Thomas considered this. "I suppose the bears don't care why the water gets cleaned up, just that it does." Blackwood nodded stiffly. "Exactly. Pragmatism, Mr. Morgan. Sometimes it's the only way forward." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "For what it's worth, not everyone at the EPA was comfortable with the initial handling of this situation. Some of us were constrained by political realities." Before Thomas could respond to this surprising admission, Lily appeared in the doorway behind him. "Are you going to make the water clean again?" she asked Blackwood directly. The official seemed taken aback by the child's forthright question. That's the goal of our assessment, yes." "Good," Lily said simply. "Because it's not just the bears who need clean water. It's the foxes and the deer and the fish and the frogs. They're all getting sick, too." Blackwood stared at the small girl, visibly uncomfortable under her earnest gaze. "We'll do our best," he said finally, with more sincerity than Thomas had yet heard from him. After Blackwood departed, promising to return with a full EPA assessment team within days, Thomas called an impromptu family meeting on the porch. Emma, Lily, and even little Noah gathered to hear the latest developments and discuss what came next. Thomas summarized, "The good news is that we've won the first battle. The EPA is going to investigate the contamination, the restraining order has been suspended, and hope is recovering at the Wildlife Center." "And the bad news?" Emma prompted. Thomas sighed. "The bad news is that investigations take time. Cleanup operations take even longer. And meanwhile, there's still contaminated water flowing through Crystal Creek." "But the bears know to go to Mr. Jenkins' pond now," Lily pointed out. "And we can tell other people with animals to be careful, too." "That's right," Thomas agreed. "And we can help set up more clean water sources for wildlife while the cleanup happens." He looked at each family member in turn. "What I want to know is, are we all okay with staying involved? This could be a long process, and it will keep our family in the public eye." "The bears are counting on us," Lily said firmly. "We promised." "I want to help the bears, too," Noah chimed in, eager to be included in the family mission. Emma smiled at her children's determination. "I think we're all in agreement. This is our home, our forest. We have a responsibility to protect it, not just for ourselves, but for all the creatures who can't speak for themselves." She paused, looking at Lily. "Well, most of them can't speak for themselves." Lily grinned. "They speak. People just need to learn how to listen." As the sun began to set on this pivotal day, Thomas found himself drawn once more to the edge of the forest. Standing at the boundary between the cultivated land of their homestead and the wild tangle of the woods beyond, he felt a deep sense of connection to this place they had made their home. Somewhere in those trees, a mother bear was leading her cubs away from danger, trusting that the humans who had helped her twice before would make things right. It was a profound responsibility, one that had begun 6 years ago when a baby girl had looked into the eyes of a desperate mother bear and seen not a dangerous predator, but a fellow creature in need. "We won't let you down," Thomas whispered to the forest. "Any of you." Behind him, the lights of their cabin glowed warmly against the gathering dusk. Inside were the people he loved most in the world: his wife, his son, and his remarkable daughter with her gift for hearing the unspoken needs of the wild. And ahead of him stretched the forest, mysterious, vulnerable, resilient, their forest, their responsibility, their legacy to protect. With renewed purpose, Thomas turned back toward home, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring in their ongoing mission to heal the waters, save the bears, and remember what so many had forgotten: how to listen to the voiceless ones with whom we share this fragile, precious world.